What's going on, everyone? We're in the garden today, and in today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 mistakes that you don't want to make when amending your soil for spring. Let's go. So the first mistake I see a lot of gardeners making is amending their soil too early. Now, a lot of gardeners like to do it early because that way it's already amended, it's ready to go, and then when it's time to plant, you can just throw your plants in the soil and you don't have to do a bunch of work all at once. So I get the sentiment, but I want to caution you on doing it too early because there's a couple things that can happen if you amend your soil a little too early. So the first thing that can happen is you can lose a lot of your nutrients due to what's called leaching. So when you have your soil here, this beautiful soil contains a lot of nutrients in it. But when it's open to the air, you can get rain, you can get snow melt and things like that. And it can actually take water-soluble nutrients and flush it through your soil. And so what happens is oftentimes a lot of gardeners will amend their soil very, very early to get it out of the way. And then all of those beautiful nutrients get flushed through the soil. And then when they plant, they have yellow seedlings. And they say, well, I've already amended, what's wrong? Well, a lot of those nutrients are still in the soil, but they're out of reach of those plants that have shallow roots until they get nice and established. So then what gardeners have to do is then they have to fertilize, and then they fertilize their crops to keep them alive until those roots can get down and tap into the nutrients that are down further. So the earlier you amend, the more nutrients are going to get washed through the soil and get further down. The second thing that amending too early can do is it can actually create a lot of compaction. You see this open soil here is great, it's ready to plant in, and in a couple weeks we're actually going to be putting some of our early spring stuff in the soil. But if you do it way too early, like 2 or 3 months too early, all of that open soil can actually start to compress and compact. And then what you're going to have is you're going to have really compressed soil that roots don't like to thrive in. It doesn't hold on to a lot of moisture, it doesn't drain very well, and so you're going to not only lose some nutrients, but you're also going to really kind of harm the overall structure of the soil. What's nice is amending your soil and then planting in about a week to 2 weeks so that when those roots are growing, they're growing in really loose, very well amended soil so they can grow and kind of expand through that soil fast, rather than planting in soil that's really compressed and hard and kind of have to fight their way through it. The second mistake that a lot of gardeners make is not amending at all. And this is obviously a soil amending mistake because it could not be more detrimental to the overall success and health of your garden by not amending your soil. I can't tell you how many times even myself as a beginning gardener would say, my garden last year was beautiful, so that must mean that next year's is going to be beautiful as well because I have good soil. Good soil is not something that is permanent. You don't permanently have good soil. If you constantly grow plants and you constantly are cycling things in and out of your garden, you are not going to have good soil forever. Soil actually degrades, and when it degrades, it looks like what's in this bed right here. So when soil degrades, it actually starts to lose a lot of texture. Now you'll notice the soil is really dark in color. It's beautiful. And that would be a mistake of me to think that just because it's dark in color means that it's fertile. As you can see, the texture is really, really fine. It almost lacks entirely a lot of the nice organic material that we look for in soil. And that's because I haven't amended this bed yet. You'll notice I still have some crops, some squash crops from last year that have kind of sat on the soil, and I've kind of let them just kind of break down and do the decomposing to kind of fix the soil. But what you'll notice is a lot of this soil from last year has started to break down in weather and get very, very compacted. And so this soil will be void of a lot of nutrients, it'll be void of a lot of organic material. And so we have not amended the soil yet. And I'm gonna probably wait another, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks before I'm gonna amend this bed because I don't wanna amend it too early, as I said in the first point. But when I amend this soil, what you'll notice is it'll go from something like this. This is like a lot of our native soils, there's a lot of clay, there's some sand, some silt and stuff in here as well. But a lot of the compost we've added, because we only add about 2 or 3 inches of compost on top, and then we kind of loosely work it into the soil. A lot of that has been broken down by worms and consumed by the plants. And so you need that refresh. If you just say, well, my garden was great last year, so I'm hoping it's going to be great this year, you're going to fall into that trap and you're going to notice your plants are really going to suffer. So your soil should go from something like this to something like this. You'll notice a huge texture difference. If I take that soil from this bed and compare it, look at the texture difference. Way more organic material, way less It's actually way less kind of gray in color. It's actually a darker color than what I thought was dark, right? It's all relative. When you look at really fertile, nice, rich soil, it's gonna have a super black, rich, amazing color to it, versus this soil that hasn't been amended yet has a lot of, actually has a lot of grays in it, a lot of that native clay that's kind of coming through that was in our soil, and you also notice the texture. So huge difference in what we have versus what we want. Third mistake I see a lot of gardeners making is not taking a pH test before they alter the pH of their soil. You see, if your soil is something like 6.0, right, it's gonna be slightly acidic. And you may wanna make it more alkaline. Maybe you're growing a lot of brassicas that like more of a neutral to a slightly alkaline pH. So you just take a bunch of lime and you throw it on the soil to make it more alkaline, right? Well, what if your soil was still a little bit alkaline from the previous season? What if you didn't need to amend the pH? Well, now you've made it very alkaline, and your plants are really going to suffer. What if your soil was acidic, right? What if your soil was 6 and you wanted to grow something like, like tomatoes, right? Well, what happens if you throw some powdered sulfur on? Well, the powdered sulfur is going to make it even more acidic than the tomatoes really need, and they're going to suffer. You should know what your baseline pH is of your soil before you amend. Because when you amend your soil, you're trying to alter the pH. And so if your soil is already acidic or already alkaline, it doesn't matter what people recommend you to do. You should do it based on what your soil says, not what your neighbor says. And I see a lot of gardeners falling into this category of people that unnecessarily amend their soil pH, and it throws their whole garden out of whack. The first thing that can happen when you throw your garden out of whack is your plants can't uptake nutrients. Plants rely on a very stable pH, whether it's acidic or alkaline, to uptake nutrients. If you have a pH that is either too acidic or too alkaline, then what that plant prefers, the plant will not uptake nutrients. The second thing that can happen is it can actually throw soil microbes and soil bacteria out of whack. Those bacteria are a lot like the same bacteria that live in your stomach. And what happens is if you have a very acidic environment or a very alkaline environment, those stomach bacteria in your stomach react the same way that the bacteria and fungi in your soil react. And that's that they can't thrive at an optimal level. And so oftentimes gardeners will unnecessarily kill off their soil life by amending their pH with something like lime or like sulfur. Now, if you want to test your soil pH, you can do it at home for pennies on the dollar. You can send a soil sample off to a lab and it's going to cost you 15, 20 bucks, but you can do it for pennies on the dollar basically in a few minutes. All you need is a mason jar. Fill it up about 1/4 of the way with soil from a couple different spots around your garden. It's going to give you an average, right? You don't want just from one location because that one location might not be representative of your whole garden. Take about 1/4 of that mason jar of soil, fill the rest up with water, and then give it a good shake. Once you shake it up, let it settle for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then go to a pool supply store and buy yourself some pH test strips. Dip it in the water. It's going to give you an indicator of whether it's alkaline or acidic, and it only costs you a couple bucks. Fourth mistake I see a lot of gardeners making is using the wrong fertilizer at the wrong time of year. You see, if you're amending your soil for spring, you want to amend something like this lavender here, and you want it to come out of dormancy really fast and have a lot of vigor. You don't want to use something that's high in phosphorus because that's something that comes later in the season. Phosphorus works with flower production as well as root production. Coming out of dormancy would be growth, and so you want to focus more on nitrogen. And so if gardeners apply the wrong type of fertilizer, it's not necessarily going to hurt their plants, but it's not going to set them up for as much success as had they picked the right one at the right time. So just know that, kind of do your research, figure out what you're growing and what they need to grow. And so, with our perennials here, we're going to apply a nice all-purpose fertilizer that has a focus on nitrogen. We use Trifecta Plus, that's just what we use, but use whatever you have that has some nitrogen in it for your perennials. And then if you're amending for a general purpose, like if you're going to plant out your early spring crops like your lettuce and your radishes, your early spring crops, just make sure it's an all-purpose fertilizer, right? You want a nice balance of everything because you're going to be growing a plant that's not a perennial. So just doing your research, kind of knowing what's growing and what they need to grow will help you to decide what to amend your soil with in early season. And the fifth mistake is using compost that's not fully finished yet. I'll explain, come follow me. So when it comes to compost, you want to use finished compost to amend your soil. Now see here, this beautiful compost is not fully finished yet. This would make an amazing mulch on our soil, and a lot of times that's what we'll use to mulch our soil. We use a semi-finished compost because it's going to incorporate some of the organic material that's going to feed the crops over time. It's going to encourage worms to come in and finish the composting process, but we wouldn't work this into our soil. We would not work this into our soil because it's not fully finished yet. If you take compost that's not fully finished and you work it into soil, it's actually going to rob nutrients from your soil, and it's actually going to use those nutrients to finish the composting process. You see, there's a lot of bacteria that use nitrogen in order to thrive. And those nitrogen bacteria are what actually break down organic material. So if they don't have a lot of nitrogen in this finished compost here, they're going to take nitrogen from the soil to finish the compost, and at that point, that's when the nitrogen will be returned to your soil. So for a half a season to maybe even a full season, your plants are going to be suffering because they're not able to obtain the nitrogen. It's locked away by the bacteria that are trying to finish the composting process. And that whole process is called nitrogen sequestration. It basically means locked away nitrogen. And so a lot of gardeners will take something like leaf litter or wood chip mulch, or even it could be just a semi-finished compost like this that's not fully finished yet, and they use this in their soil, and then their plants suffer and they wonder why. And so that can be a huge mistake. What you want to look for with finished compost is you want to look for material that's not identifiable. And you see, if you come in here close, you can check out, so there's a ton of worm activity. It looks absolutely incredible. And this is about 90% finished, but I still am going to let this go a couple, maybe a month and a half longer, because you can see here still, it's got a lot of leaf litter that's not fully broken down yet, right? There's still, like, that is totally a little maple helicopter, right? It's not broken down yet. And there's a bunch of beautiful worms in here doing that breakdown process. You still see some of this white mycelium. This white here is the hyphae of the beneficial fungi that's actually breaking down this organic material, right? You can still see a lot of strands of grass clippings. Look at that. So see, it's not fully broken down yet. A lot of this stuff, I mean, this is absolutely heavenly stuff, but it wouldn't be ready quite yet to put it into our soil. We're gonna wait about another month. This should be a lot darker, should be a lot more black, and you should be able to see a lot less identifiable features that says, oh, that's what that is, that's what that is. So it's not quite ready yet. And if we add that to our soil and mix it in, it's going to sequester some of that nitrogen. So those are the 5 mistakes I see a lot of gardeners making when amending their soil. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I also really hope that through this episode, it's going to help keep you from making those same mistakes that I made as a beginning gardener. A lot of people ask how I create this content. And to be honest, a lot of this content is created from my own learned experiences and stuff that I've learned over the years and mistakes that I've made. And so I want to keep you from making those same mistakes. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully y'all learned something new. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care.